If you've ever watched Real Madrid in a big night and thought, how do they keep doing this? You're not alone. Some clubs win trophies. Real Madrid built a whole mythology around winning them, and the wild part is, a lot of that mythology is backed by very real moments, with real people, real pressure, and real consequences. So for the next hour, I want to tell you the full story, from the dusty beginnings in early 1900s Madrid, to the rise of the white shirt as an international symbol, to the stadium that became a character in its own right, to the eras that basically shaped modern football, and finally to the club that, in the 2020s, is still collecting European cups like it's a habit. And I'm not going to do this like a Wikipedia read. This is the story as a narrative, because Real Madrid's history isn't a straight line. It's a series of turning points, moments where the club could have gone one way and chose another. Moments where the stakes were bigger than a match. All right, let's go back to the beginning. Madrid, early 1900s. Football is still young in Spain. It's not a polished global industry. It's not even the dominant sport yet. It's a new idea spreading through Europe, carried by students, workers, travelers, and pure curiosity. In March 1902, what would become Real Madrid takes a formal step. The club is officially formed and elects its first board of directors. The name at the time is Madrid Football Club. It's simple, direct, and honest. It's a local club in a city that's still figuring out what it wants to be. And in those early years, what Real Madrid becomes famous for isn't European nights, or superstars, or billion-euro stadium renovations. It's the cup. Spain's major national competition in the early era is the Copa del Rey, the Spanish Cup, and Madrid starts leaving fingerprints on it quickly. In 1905, they win their first Spanish Cup, beating Athletic Club 1-0 inches the final. That might sound like a small detail now, but back then, winning that cup is how you announce yourself to the country. It's how you say, we're not just playing, we're competing. And then they do it again, and again, and again. By the time you're a few years into this story, you start noticing a pattern that will follow Real Madrid forever. The club doesn't just like winning. It likes the feeling of becoming the club people measure themselves against. But there's another piece of identity forming too. The look. Real Madrid becomes the whites. The white kit becomes its signature, clean, simple, almost arrogant in its simplicity, and at the time, it stands out. You can spot it instantly in old photos, a white team in a world that still looks like early industrial Europe. As the club grows, it moves through different grounds. These aren't the modern stadiums we imagine now, they're more like fields with structure around them. But every move matters, because it shows the club is stable enough to demand space in the city. And then comes one of the most important symbolic moments in Real Madrid's history. In 1920, the club receives the title, Real meaning royal, granted by King Alfonso XIII. That's where Real Madrid comes from. It's not a nickname. It's an official mark of prestige, and it comes with changes to the identity. A crown enters the symbolism. The club is no longer just Madrid FC. It becomes something like an institution. And that matters in Spain. It matters in Madrid. And it matters in the way the club is perceived for the next century. Now, to understand why Real Madrid eventually becomes Real Madrid, the global giant, you have to understand how Spain is changing. The 1920s are turbulent politically, but culturally the country is modernizing. Football is becoming bigger, more organized, more intense. In 1924, Real Madrid inaugurates the stadium that becomes their home for decades, the Viejo Chamartín, on the Chamartín de la Rosa estate. And for the opening, they play Newcastle United, an English club, and win 3-2. Again, it's not just a match, it's a message. England is the birthplace of modern football. Playing an English team to open your stadium is like inviting the origin story to witness your ambition. And then, in 1929, Spanish football creates what becomes the backbone of everything. La Liga, a proper league, a season-long test, a way to measure consistency, not just one-off cup drama. Real Madrid wins its first league title in the 1931-32 season and then retains it the following year. Think about that! Even before the European era, before the stadium that everyone knows, before the myth of the Champions League, the club is already building the habit of domination. But history is never clean. Spain in the 1930s and 40s is not just a football story. It's political upheaval. Then the Spanish Civil War. Football doesn't disappear, but everything changes around it. Clubs lose players. The country is fractured. The meaning of Madrid itself becomes complicated because Madrid is not just a city, it's the center of power, the capital, the symbol everyone argues over. This is where it's important to be careful with the myth. People love to reduce the story of Spanish football to simple political cartoons. This club represents this ideology. That club represents that region. The reality is more complex. Real Madrid's history sits inside Spanish history, and Spanish history in the 20th century is messy. What matters for our story is what happens next. The club goes into a post-war era, and the next decision turns Real Madrid from a strong Spanish club into a global blueprint. In 1943, Santiago Bernabéu becomes president. And if you only know the name because of the stadium, I want you to understand this. Bernabéu is not just a president. He's the architect of modern Real Madrid. He takes over a club in a country rebuilding itself, and he thinks bigger than Spain. He thinks in infrastructure. He thinks in branding before branding is even a word in football. He thinks in a way that makes him feel like a CEO from the future dropped into the 1940s. One of his first major moves is the stadium. Real Madrid needs a home worthy of ambition, so the club starts building a new ground on the same site as the old one. This is the birth of the stadium that will become one of the most famous places in sports history. On 14 December 1947, the new stadium is inaugurated. The match is against Belenenses. Real Madrid wins 3-1, and Sabino Barinaga scores the first goal in the stadium's history. And look at what this represents. A club isn't just building a place to play. It's building a stage for the kind of football that can become theater. In June 1954, the stadium's new capacity is inaugurated after expansion. And in 1955, the stadium is unanimously given the name Santiago Bernabéu. Think about that. The club doesn't wait until he's gone. It honors him while he's still shaping the institution. That tells you how central he is to the identity. Now, here's the twist. A stadium alone doesn't create a legend. You need the story to match the architecture. You need a team that can fill that stage with something unforgettable. And that's where Alfredo Di Stefano enters. In September 1953, Di Stefano makes his debut for Real Madrid and scores in a friendly against Nancy. This is one of those deceptively simple facts that changes everything. Because Di Stefano doesn't just become a great player for Real, he becomes the symbol of an era. He becomes the engine of a team that will basically invent the European superclub in real time. The timing is perfect. European football is evolving. The European Cup is created in the mid-1950s, the tournament that eventually becomes the UEFA Champions League. And the first editions are not the polished, billionaire-sponsored spectacle we have today. They're closer to a daring experiment. Can the best clubs in Europe actually compete in a true international tournament? Real Madrid doesn't just participate. Real Madrid hijacks the story. In the 1955-56 season, they win the first European Cup, and then they do it again in 1956-57, and again in 1957-58, and again in 1958-59, and again in 1959-60. 5 consecutive European Cups. That's not just a record, that's a foundational myth for the entire competition. The Champions League, as a concept, is built on the idea of European royalty, and Real Madrid basically writes the first chapter with a crown already on their head. And the 1960 final becomes one of the most famous matches ever played. Real Madrid beats Eintracht Frankfurt 7-3 at Hampden Park in Glasgow, a 1-0 goal European Cup final. Even saying it out loud sounds unreal. Alfredo Di Stefano and Ferenc Puskás both score hat-tricks. The crowd is enormous. The match is remembered not just for winning, but for the sheer spectacle, like Real Madrid is telling Europe, this tournament belongs to us. Now, imagine being a fan in that era. Football is still mostly local, mostly national. You might know a few foreign teams, you might read about them, but seeing your club travel across Europe and dominate, that feels like a new kind of power. And Real Madrid leans into it. The club becomes associated with a certain idea, European nights, the white shirt under floodlights, the confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance, that no match is ever truly lost, because the club's identity is built on finding a way. But dominance never lasts forever without evolving. The first golden generation can't be eternal. Players age, rivals adapt, football changes. So what does Real Madrid do? It reinvents itself without abandoning its identity. In 1965-66, Real Madrid wins the European Cup again. This is the Yeah team era, a new generation. And that matters, because it proves the first five weren't a fluke of one squad. The club can renew itself and still reach the top of Europe. That 1966 European Cup win is also tied to one of the greatest names in Real Madrid history, Paco Gento. His legacy is ridiculous. 6 European Cups as a player, a record that stands as one of the sport's most untouchable achievements. Now, let's zoom out for a second, because while Europe is the glamorous part of the story, domestic football is where the club's week-to-week identity is forged. Real Madrid's rivalry with Barcelona becomes the defining rivalry of Spanish football and one of the biggest rivalries in sports, period. El Clásico isn't just a game. It becomes a global cultural event. And over decades, it's shaped by stars, politics, media, and the simple fact that these are two giants fighting for the same oxygen. But Real Madrid's domestic identity is also shaped by something else, the pressure of being Real Madrid. For most clubs, winning a league title feels like a dream. For Real Madrid, it often feels like a requirement. That pressure is part of the reason the club cycles through eras quickly. The standards are brutal. The demand is constant. And as decades pass, you get the rhythm of the Real Madrid story, a period of dominance, a period of rebuilding, and then an eruption of trophies that resets the club's place in the world. In the 1970s and early 80s, Real remains successful domestically, collecting league titles and cups. But Europe becomes harder. Other clubs rise. Tactics evolve. The competition deepens. Then comes the 1980s. And if you want to understand why Real Madrid fans talk about spirit as much as trophies, this is where that feeling gets sharpened. The 1980s are the era of La Quinta del Buitre, a generation led by Emilio Butragueño, El Buitre. This group becomes the backbone of a domestic machine. Real Madrid wins La Liga 5 times in a row from 1985-86 through 1989-90. 5 consecutive league titles in a modernizing league is domination. It's the club reminding Spain that, even without being European champions, it can be the center of gravity at home. And then there's Europe again, not the European Cup this time, but the UEFA Cup. Real Madrid wins the UEFA Cup in 1984-85, and then defends it in 1985-86. 2 in a row. Back-to-back European trophies. Again, the pattern: if Real Madrid enters a competition seriously, it tends to leave it with a trophy eventually. But also, the 80s builds something psychological. Because the European Cup, the one that matters most to Real Madrid's identity, is missing. It's the trophy they feel is theirs by birthright. And the longer it's missing, the more it haunts the club. That drought becomes a storyline. Real Madrid, the kings of Europe, haven't been crowned in decades. The club tries different approaches, different squads, different stars. And then finally, in 1998, the drought ends in the most Real Madrid way possible. A tight, tense final, decided by a single goal. The 1998 European Cup final is against Juventus. In Amsterdam, Real Madrid wins 1-0. That title becomes known as La Septima, the 7th European Cup. And it matters beyond the match. It's like a dam breaking. The club hasn't won Europe's biggest trophy since 1966. For 32 years, the identity has been waiting for its crown, and suddenly, it's back. Now, here's what makes Real Madrid different from almost every other club. Once they get that trophy back, they don't treat it as the end of a journey. They treat it like permission to become even more ambitious. 2 years later, in 2000, Real Madrid wins the Champions League again, La Octava, beating Valencia 3-0 inches the final. Then, in 2002, they do it again, La Novena. The final is against Bayer Leverkusen, and Real Madrid wins 2-1. This is the night of Zidane's volley, one of the most iconic goals in Champions League final history. The kind of goal that feels like it belongs in a museum, because it's not just technique, it's timing, elegance, and the weight of the moment. And around this time, Real Madrid becomes something else. Not only a football giant, but a global entertainment brand. Florentino Perez's presidency begins a modern era of strategy. Galácticos. The idea is simple and insane. Sign the biggest stars in the world. Every summer, make a statement. Turn Real Madrid into the ultimate destination. You get Luis Figo, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo Nazario, David Beckham. Later, more global icons. Real Madrid becomes the club that feels like a movie cast. Now, it's important to say this clearly. The Galácticos era isn't pure trophies. It's not a perfect sports project. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it creates imbalance. But it transforms Real Madrid's global identity. It makes the club not just famous, but unavoidable. Even if you don't watch La Liga, you know Real Madrid. Even if you don't know the results, you know the badge. That's not an accident. That's a club building itself as a global institution. Then comes another classic Real Madrid pattern, a period of turbulence, and then the biggest era of dominance since the 1950s. In 2009, Real Madrid enters a new superstar phase with Cristiano Ronaldo. And if Di Stefano is the symbol of the first European dynasty, Cristiano becomes the symbol of the modern one. Now, you can debate the greatest players ever, and people will fight forever. But what Cristiano does at Real Madrid is undeniably historic. Goals at impossible rates, big game moments, an obsession with winning that matches the club's own obsession. But here's what makes this era special. It's not just one player. It's the infrastructure of a dynasty. You have Sergio Ramos, a defender who scores like a forward in the biggest moments. You have Luka Modric, the controller of tempo. You have Toni Kroos, who plays football like he's programming it. You have Karim Benzema, who evolves from a supporting striker into a Ballon d'Or-level leader. You have Casemiro, the shield. You have Marcelo, Dani Carvajal, and a whole system of experience. And the manager who becomes the face of Real Madrid's modern European success is Carlo Ancelotti, calm, adaptable, almost too relaxed for the chaos around him, which is exactly why it works. But before we get to the avalanche of Champions Leagues, we have to talk about one match. The match that, for many fans, defines what Real Madrid DNA means in the modern era. The 2014 Champions League final, Real Madrid versus Atletico Madrid, a city derby in Lisbon, Real chasing La Decima, the 10th European Cup, Atletico leading late. The clock is melting. The trophy is slipping away. And then, deep into stoppage time, Sergio Ramos scores. If you've ever seen that moment, you remember it like a personal memory, even if you're not a Madrid fan. The header, the explosion, the disbelief on Atletico faces, the way the entire stadium energy flips in a second. Real Madrid goes on to win 4-1 after extra time, and that trophy La Decima is not just a 10th title, it's a psychological release. It's like the club finally reconnects with its destiny in the modern Champions League era. And once that door is open, Real Madrid does what Real Madrid does. In 2016, they win the Champions League again, beating Atletico in another final, this time on penalties in Milan. In 2017, they win again, beating Juventus 4-1 in Cardiff. That win is historic because it confirms something. Real Madrid is now the first club in the Champions League era to win back-to-back titles. Then, in 2018, they win again, beating Liverpool 3-1 in Kiev. 3 consecutive Champions Leagues. Let that sink in. In modern football, with financial parity, tactical evolution, and elite competition, winning 1 Champions League is hard. Winning 2 is rare. Winning 3 in a row is almost unthinkable. But Real Madrid does it, and it becomes the modern equivalent of the 1950s dynasty, a run that future generations will talk about like myth. Now, after such a peak, most clubs would collapse. Stars age, motivation fades, rivals adjust. But Real Madrid's next trick is arguably their most impressive. They transition into a new generation while still winning Europe. The 2022 Champions League run is a masterpiece of survival and momentum. Real Madrid beats Liverpool 1-0 inches the final in Paris to win their 14th European Cup. That team blends old and new, the experienced core plus rising stars. It feels like the club proving, again, that it can evolve without losing identity. And then, in 2024, Real Madrid does it again. They win the Champions League final 2-0 against Borussia Dortmund at Wembley. Dani Carvajal scores, Vinicius Junior scores, and Real Madrid lifts their 15th European Cup in the season listed as 2023-24. 15 Champions Leagues. That number is so big, it stops sounding like a football statistic and starts sounding like a category of its own. And it's not just Europe. In the 2023-24 season, Real Madrid wins La Liga again, their 36th league title. 36. That's consistency across generations, across football revolutions, across different versions of the sport. And this is where the story becomes almost unfair, because while most clubs have a golden era that defines them, Real Madrid has multiple eras that could each define a club. The early cup dominance, the royal identity, the Bernabéu rebuild, the Di Stefano and European Cup creation era, the Yeye generation, the Quinta del Buitre machine, La Septima breaking the drought, the Galácticos transforming global football culture, the Cristiano-era Champions League dynasty, the modern transition into a new core while still winning Europe. If you zoom out, the club's history looks like a set of waves. Every time it feels like the club might become just another giant, it finds a way to regenerate. And the stadium is always there, because the Bernabéu isn't just a home ground. It's part of the mythology. It's where comebacks feel more possible. It's where pressure feels heavier for opponents. It's where Real Madrid's identity, the idea of never giving up, the idea of believing the impossible is normal, becomes almost contagious. Now, let's talk about that identity for a second, because it's not magic. It's built. Real Madrid's culture is built on a few core ideas that repeat across a century. 1. Winning is the expectation, not the celebration. That's why their legends are measured not just by talent, but by trophies and big moments. 2. The club is always bigger than one player. Even when they sign superstars, even when an era feels defined by one name, the institution remains the constant. 3. Big stages are not a burden, they're the environment. Many clubs fear finals. Real Madrid seems to breathe in them. And 4. Reinvention is part of survival. Real Madrid doesn't just chase trophies. It chases relevance. It wants to be the center of the football world in every era, under every format. That's why the club has a formal honors list that spans basically every era of organized football. Champions Leagues across 8 different decades. League titles from the 1930s to the 2020s. Domestic cups and super cups. European trophies beyond the main one. This isn't a club that peaked once. This is a club that keeps finding ways to peak again. And there's one more detail that feels like the perfect summary of the entire story. On the club's official honors list, Real Madrid is recognized with the Best Club of the 20th Century FIFA Trophy, dated 11 December 2000. Whether you agree with awards or not, the symbolism is perfect. A club founded in 1902 is officially being framed as the defining club of the entire 20th century. And yet, the wild part is, the story didn't stop in 2000. It didn't stop in 2014. It didn't stop after the three-peat. It didn't stop after 15 European Cups. So if you're asking, what is Real Madrid, really? Here's the simplest answer I can give you after walking through more than a century of history. Real Madrid is football's most successful long-term experiment in making winning a tradition, not just a goal. It's a club that treats history like fuel. It turns pressure into identity. It turns expectations into standards. And it turns standards into a cycle. Build, dominate, rebuild, dominate again. And that's why, even if you don't love them, you can't ignore them. Because in football, there are big clubs. And then there's the club that keeps rewriting what big even means. That's the story of Real Madrid from 1902 to the modern era. And if history has taught us anything, it's that the next chapter is never as far away as you think.